Welcome to Cutcher Neale's Starting in Private Practice virtual conference, and hopefully some of you are enjoying a few little more freedoms in the last last week or so with changes with COVID. So to get started today, Dr. Alex Lobanov was awarded his medical degree from the University of Melbourne in 2009 and went on to gain his specialist qualification in general practice while serving as a full-time aviation medical officer in the Royal Australian Air Force. So certainly an interesting start to medical practice. Following several deployments and tours to the Middle East, Asia and the UK with the RAF, Dr. Lobanov decided to settle in Newcastle, where he's worked as a GP since 2016. He's a director and GP at Hunter Health Hub in Hamilton East and a member of the Australian Institute of Company Directors. If there's one thing I can say to you, Alex has some very good insights. He's experienced joining a practice and starting a practice, so he can see it from both perspectives. And I always appreciate Alex's financial nous, because he's always challenging the thought processes, the way the practices come together. And with that, I'll now hand you over to Alex. Thank you.
Morning, everyone. So that's forward, backwards, no worries. Thanks for that introduction, Jared. It looks like an action-packed day today with pretty much a 101 on how to start or join a medical practice, which is fantastic with all the bits and pieces that are associated. So I've left my contact details there as well. It's also on the last slide, just in case anyone has any questions at the end or want to get in touch with me. Okay, so just a little bit about me. We've already covered up on a bit on it, but that's me about 5 years ago when I was probably a lot fitter, lots more hair, not that you could see it, and probably 20 kilos lighter, to be honest, pre-kids. So moved to Newcastle in 2015 and joined, started working in general practice in 2016 with view for stepping out of the Air Force. So basically just to get some work-life balance back. Now, in that process, decided to, or had the opportunity to join a private practice in over 2017, 2018, and ended up taking over from a retiring GP. And so in that process, took over his patient base as well, which was quite good. Now that we had a 1 year handover takeover period, which meant that at the end of the day, when he walked out the door and I started in his role, I had it was a very seamless process. So that was something we can talk about a bit later as well. Now, unfortunately, that practice dissolved in December of 2020 due to some differences between the directors there, and so that again will be something we can touch on a bit later. In that, what could we have done to avoid that situation in the first place? Following on from that, I've been through the experience of then starting a new practice in the middle of the pandemic, January this year, and I'm happy to say that we were able to return to profit within 6 months of starting that practice, although it has been quite a challenging experience in its own right. Currently, I'm a director and GP at Hunter Health Hub in Hamilton East, and we're always looking for GPs to either join us or come work for us as contractors. So if you're interested at all, shoot me an email. Okay, so through the course of this presentation, we'll touch on a few things. So there's the benefits of joining or starting a private practice, some of the pitfalls of starting a private practice, and some of the lessons learned that I've experienced on the way, and hopefully can impart to avoid a heartache for anyone starting out. Okay, so first and foremost is why do it? We're all doctors. We have ability to generate a fairly good income stream without being a practice owner. So why join or start a private practice in your own right? Well, I think a lot of it has to do with autonomy, being your own boss, setting your own rules. No one's telling you how and what to do things. You can set the way the things you like, remembering that all your staff report to you. There's no need to ask for permission per se. You can run it as how you see fit. There's also the opportunity to have a legacy of a practice, depending on how long you want it to last for. If you want to change the landscape of medicine or how things are done, it is pretty much the only way you can do it is to basically run your own show. Now, that also includes challenging how traditional medicine is run. You can basically, within rules, as long as you're within the boundaries of safe practice, do essentially whatever you like. There's also the challenge outside of medicine. So we're all, as clinicians, we're experts in the field of treating patients and medicine in general, but in the business field is something that we're not trained in. We're not trained in how to navigate things like the Medicare benefits scheme, work cover, etc. So these are all challenges that come to us in our working lives after we've completed our formal medical training. And its extension of that is then, well, how do you run a business successfully? Some of the benefits. So look, it can be potentially quite lucrative. There are many sources of income outside of patient care, that one-on-one patient care, which does carry risk in its own right. So it said additional sources of income include things like the practice incentive payments, workforce incentive payments, and government grants, which you may or may not have been aware of if you're currently working as a contractor, but these are additional payments that do go to the practice. And in my opinion, should be shared fairly equally amongst doctors who work in the practice. Certainly at Hunter Health Hub, our way of doing things is that everyone is offered the opportunity to be involved in practice ownership and then also share in these income sources. I don't think it's fair to necessarily make extra money off the backs of the labour of your peers and colleagues, but you can run it as a dictatorship should you wish. There's also the opportunities, I suppose. There's always opportunities out to look at expanding, looking at government grants, both state and federal. So some examples of that would be, even within the pandemic, never let a good crisis go to waste, but many practices saw the opportunity to expand into roles such as swabbing, respiratory clinics, and there was quite a lot of money to be made in that with that opportunity. Obviously, there's risks associated with that, but those kind of opportunities only are really present if you own a practice or are involved in the decision making of a practice. There's a personal satisfaction and reward. So look, when you're just working somewhere, obviously there is the personal satisfaction reward from providing good quality clinical care, good patient care, but to then expand on that, as a business owner, you're responsible for essentially putting food on the tables of your employees as well. And at Hunter Health Hub, we've got 10 or so employees, and we are directly responsible for their ability to generate a livelihood as well. And there is some satisfaction in that. Also, expansion of a practice, making it successful, making its name well known is something which I think carries a significant satisfaction to myself. Operational direction and involvement. So without being a practice owner, it's very difficult to have any major impact on which way a practice is going, which direction it's going to take, and the decisions. So as many would know, with the current situation with COVID and coronavirus, we have often been hit very out of the blue with changes in the way the government handles the pandemic, and often we find out about things at the same time that patients do. Now, that needs a very agile response to be able to handle that properly, and as an owner, you can make changes very quickly and have that then delivered by your staff. Okay, so next one is why not do it? Risk. There is inherent risk with being a business owner. There's risks of the business continuity and sustainability due to things that some things are out of your control, such as changes in legislation, changes to the Medicare benefits scheme, some of which have significant impacts and challenges as to how we run a medical practice. So as examples of that, some of the changes in item numbers for GP ECGs, which came through about a year ago or so, significantly changed how GPs were able to continue to provide ECG services that were in a profitable way, noting that profit and medical practice, I don't think, are two words that are that should be considered separately. You cannot run a successful medical practice without profit. You need a medical practice to be able to innovate and change, and that is one of the things that is absolutely critical to running a successful practice. The political environment. So depending on the government of the day, whether they're pro GP or specialist or not, that may significantly change the underlying business trajectory. Pandemics. Yep. So COVID has been it's been a huge challenge. It's been a burden at times, but I think that it has caused significant issues with burnout in a lot of the medical fraternity, but at the same time, it's also created a lot of challenges, and I think that we as a field have risen to the challenge and hopefully continue to do so. But that is something we need to continue to manage. Stresses. Now, I put stress, but so this potentially could be something, an area where you find growth as well. So it's an opportunity in its own right, where these are things that we haven't been trained in through medical school. Things like, how do you manage employees? How do you hire and fire? How do you manage difficult employees? How do you performance manage? How do you do things like key performance indices and things like that, which are an important part of making sure that things are running smoothly. Medical practice does take up quite a lot of time, and you have to give it the time that it deserves. I think it's very difficult to run a successful practice if you just bury your head in your clinical work and hope that everything is running well outside. Yes, there is the ability, I suppose, to outsource, and I think you should, where you can, to people like so accountants, lawyers, IT, practice management, etc. But if you are the captain of the ship and you need to be involved in where it's going, so blindly just going along does cause drama. So it is important to give it the time that it actually needs. There's risk for the practice. There's so structure. So that's one of the things that it did bring down the practice that I was previously a part of, in that there was fundamental differences as far as how we thought the practice should be structured, and reading through the agreements, which I must say I didn't do properly when I first joined the practice, looking at how decisions are made and who needs to be involved in those decisions is incredibly important. So and I will touch on this a bit later in my presentation, but making sure that you have dotted all your I's and crossed your T's before you even consider joining a practice. Starting a practice is a bit of a different story, but certainly joining, you have to be aware of what you're getting in for. Additional financial requirements. Now, there's lots of costs associated with running a practice, which I think a lot of those will be touched on today during the presentations. Things like your software, your IT support, things like servers, rent, or if you're going to own a practice, insurances, list goes on. Too many to list right now, but just being aware of those things, and those costs are subject to change and sometimes can cause a bit of a bill shock, I suppose. So need to be aware of that. Okay, so I've touched on this a little bit in the previous slide, but some of the pitfalls, including unpaid hours. So it's highly dependent on the practice circumstances. I must say, starting a new practice from scratch is exceptionally time intensive. Making decisions, looking at pros and cons of different courses of actions is incredibly time dependent, but it is also time well spent. As the practice starts to mature and adopt a steady state, things tend to be a little bit easier, but you do need to still make sure that you're spending the time to make sure that things are going in the right direction. This has been exemplified quite significantly by COVID-19, which has been a major challenge. As I mentioned previously, often we find out about changes in vaccine rollout, or lockdowns, things like that, at the same time as the general public. And often the first time we're hearing about it is often from patients calling the practice or coming into the practice saying, "Oh, ScoMo has just announced that I get the jab now." Great. How do we find that information out? And just putting the hours there is quite significant. Look, in my experience, many GPs do shy away from practice ownership due to perceived difficulties, but I challenge you to consider the difficulties as more as a challenge and an area of growth. I think that having just doing something different from your usual field, and I keep on harping on about that, I believe is an important thing to even to make you a better doctor as well, but also to diversify your risk. So as mentioned briefly, that patient-doctor interaction that we do many times a day is every single one of those interactions, even if we're practicing the best quality medicine we can potentially lead to a medico-legal issue, which may or may not become a drama or not, but that's many sleepless nights dealing with medical regulators, insurance, etc. So they're risks that we take every day. So by becoming a practice owner and then diversifying where your income comes from, it does mitigate that to some extent. Okay, so some of the lessons that I've learned along the way: get good advice, get it early, and expect to pay for it. Nothing in life comes free, certainly not good advice. I think that as a doctor who works in private practice, I charge private fees. The patients expect to get a service for that fee, which I hope I'm able to deliver to them. I think that service is worthy of the fee that I charge, and I think that's no different when we're seeking advice about how to start a practice, especially in areas where we may not be experts. So legally, from an accounting point of view, from an IT perspective and insurance, I think they're the main areas where I think it's really important to get you good advice, and I'm glad to see that all those areas are represented in today's presentation. So none of these things will come free. They will cost you money, but I think it's definitely worthwhile going down these pathways before you even consider starting or joining, to make sure that it is going to work. If you're joining an existing practice, know who you're getting into bed with. Spend the time to get them to know the other directors or partners in the practice. Spend time to get to know how the practice works. Who's actually making decisions, who's pulling the strings? It's something that I don't think necessarily takes an exorbitant amount of time, but that time just to really get to know someone on a personal level, maybe over maybe over some coffee, maybe over a dinner, etc., will very quickly let you know if there's an issue here or not. Now, in hindsight, I knew there was an issue joining my practice, but I suppose I was rose-colored glasses, chose to ignore it, and that's bitten me in the ass. Be prepared to constantly learn and be comfortable with change. Now, this is a big one. If you don't change, if you're not open to change, then you're doomed to fail. It's something that is very important within our fields. And the last one here is look after yourself. Make time to do that. You are your biggest asset, whether that's from a clinical point of view or a business point of view. So do make time to look after yourself. Make time if you need to. Okay, so from the point of view of practice ownership, so this is more again about joining a practice. Make sure you read the agreements and contracts. You probably won't understand it because most of these things are written in legalese to try to confuse you. So make sure you seek legal advice before signing anything. Now, the AMA does offer a legal service. Very, very limited. I would suggest that you probably need something more than what the AMA offers in terms of I think it's a 1 hour free advice session before you're considering joining a practice. The key questions if you are looking at joining a practice is how do you get in? How do you get out? What happens if someone's behaving badly? What if you want to get out? What if you leave in a good way? What if you leave in a bad way? So that needs to be spelled out in black and white. Voting. So if it's a practice that has multiple directors, how many people does it take to vote for certain issues? Very, very important. Otherwise, you can end up in a stalemate or in a situation where nothing can be changed, even though you do have a majority of people who do want to change. What is the structure? This is something that's a little bit above my pay grade, but is it a partnership, unit trust, company? How are things run? Is it the right way to run things? Is it the most beneficial way to run things? Is it the safest way to run things? These are all questions that need to ask. And the following two questions. So goodwill and what is a practice worth? Now, these are very, very complex questions. There is no simple answer. There are some traditional pricing models to look into how much you should be paying to enter a practice, but often it has nothing to do with any of that. And it's all got to do with, you've got to look at other things other than the pricing models often. So I would suggest that in those areas to seek specialist medical accounting advice. Certainly in my situation, the cost of joining the practice was significantly less than any of the models out there. So it's to me it was a no-brainer decision to join the practice. Now I've probably paid more since then in fees to dissolve a practice and then start a new practice, but overall I think I'm still ahead compared to what I would have been should I paid fair market value at the time, to be fair. Okay, so things to look for. Support. You can't do this on your own. Many GPs have tried, many GPs have failed. You need to have support, and practice manager is your main pillar of support here. Consider yourself as a member of a board, and your practice manager as a CEO. They are your right-hand person, the right-hand man or woman in this endeavour. You need to trust them implicitly, but at the same time also have an understanding of what their job is and what they are actually doing. Secondary to a practice manager is having a good administrative and nursing support. You really don't want to get bogged down fixing issues with administrative nursing level if you can avoid it. And again, that should be things that a practice manager should be dealing with, but you should have good oversight. So getting good staff, even if you have to pay a little bit extra for it, is absolutely worthwhile. What's the stability of the team? How long have the GPs been there? Are they happy? What's the turnover like, both GPs and staff in general? What's the culture like? Is it a toxic culture? Is it a good culture? Are they friendly outside of work? The staff happy? And last of all is the medicine itself. Are the doctors practicing good medicine? Are there regular clinical meetings? What are the clinical policies like? And are there any issues with accreditation? So probably worthwhile just asking to have a look at some of the previous accreditation documents if the practice has been around for a while. Okay, I think that's all I've really got. So if there's any questions, just shoot them through and I'll endeavour to answer them.
You can't see, I'll be off screen, Alex, but thank you very much for an insightful presentation. We do have some questions, and I guess one of the key themes I'm seeing in some of the questions here is what really drove you to want to own a practice?
For me, it was wanting to be autonomous, I suppose, and make my own decisions and take control of my trajectory. So coming from a background in the military where you can't take leave without putting in a leave form, you're told where and how you work. So that's a very sort of authoritarian approach, I suppose. Not that all practices are like that, but if you're working for someone, then at the end of the day, you are giving up some aspect of control. So look, sometimes you can consider control to be an artificial construct because there are things, you can't just go for a holiday in the Maldives whenever you like. It doesn't work like that. There are business realities, but there are a lot of things you can control as a business owner that you can't as a contractor.
Another really good question here is, it comes on to the themes of how do you balance your time? There's practice management, there's being the clinical lead, there's trying to sort out work-life balance. So how's that all come together for you?
Sure, a lot of trial and error, to be honest, a lot of trial and error. Look, you need to control your calendar here and realise that you can't be everywhere and everything to everyone. So if that means blocking off an hour or two, or we meet on a weekly basis. So every Wednesday morning we'll meet for at least an hour or two, and that's something that we do regularly. Now that may reduce with time depending, and that's part of that's because of COVID and the constant changes with COVID. Obviously, as time goes on, we might be able to make those meetings fortnightly or monthly. But I think having regular scheduled meetings and then being able to change that as well and adjust and have some agility associated is important.
And you are working with partners, even though we might have a corporate structure and sole traders and whatnot. Any tips for working with partners?
Address issues early. really address issue with issue. There's always going to be, even if the best of friends are going to disagree from time to time, don't let issues fester. Address them head on, even if that's outside of a meeting construct. Take them out to coffee or offer to go to lunch or something like that. I think just sorting things out at the lowest level is going to be important. If you get them let out of control, then next minute you're involving lawyers and it's all over at that point.
Whilst, I appreciate that the doctor is the primary person in a GP practice, but there's a lot of staff that make it all happen. In fact, I think it's almost like 2 staff to 1 doctor in most practices. So how do you motivate and run the staff?
We have regular social events with the staff, so making sure that we're celebrating. It's quite, some of the things are very, very little, but they make a big difference to the staff. Things like providing morning teas and coffees, birthdays, making sure we're getting a cake, Christmas parties, making sure that we're acknowledging events in our staff's lives, like having a baby and things like that. They seem small, but they do add up, and they do make people feel that they are a valued part of the team. And then when you're faced with a situation that requires people to put in above and beyond, such as COVID, they tend to be more agreeable at that point. Just take care of your people, I think, is the main thing.
It is. It's an incredible part of any business. It doesn't matter who you are. You're only as good as the team that surrounds you.
Absolutely.
That was a fantastic presentation. Thank you, Alex. It's given us an incredible amount of insight. And I think it's very interesting when you, in summary, I think about your path from the RAF to joining a practice and maybe being a little wooed at the start to then starting your own practice. So there's certainly lots to learn along the way.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Cheers.